Good evening and welcome once again to Uncivil Disobedience. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me, as always, is my partner in crime and co-host, Kennedy Cooper.
What's up?
Hey. And today, our guest is Michael Tanuvasa, though for him it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tell the audience a bit about yourself, Michael.
Yeah, just like being first day at school. I mean, obviously, I live in Samoa, but I'm from America. I'm from Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, and to be exact. And my name is non-voting felon, so that's kind of self-explanatory. I actually got my rights taken away from Biden's crime bill, and growing up in a all blue city. I don't look at the Democrats as saviors. I actually look at them as like they were the people that sent ICE into my neighborhood and sent the DEA, sent the police, and sent the FBI into my neighborhood and put RICO cases on me and like a lot of my family members, and including my dad. So I got bit by the crime bill twice as a baby when my dad went to prison, and then as an adult when it happened with me and a lot of my homeboys that I was doing crime with. So for me, the Democrats, they hold every position you could possibly have in Los Angeles. And like I said on Compton Jay's show the other day, Boyle Heights median income was $33,000, which is $9,000 less than Compton.
Yep.
And, 40% of every kid in Boyle Heights has an undocumented parent, at least one. So, we're getting hit by a lot of different areas that are pretty mainstream on the leftist side. Abolish ICE, defunding the police. Those are pretty much stuff that we deal with on a regular basis. And also prison. The city where I grew up is like a revolving door for prison. I know people that most of my friends that are like convicts and felons.
Yeah.
I can't name that many people that haven't been locked up before.
My mom worked for San Bernardino County teaching kids who had been thrown out of the school system because they had gone to juvenile hall. Sometimes for something stupid. Like the kid who went to juvenile hall for 3 years for carrying a weapon because they had a knife that they used to open their gas cap that just happened to fit their gas cap just right because they had lost the key. Which, sure, they shouldn't have had the knife, but but expelling them from school and putting them in juvenile hall for 3 years seems excessive for using the wrong thing to open your gas cap.
Yeah, I got expelled from school when my sophomore year and all for not going to class enough. So their answer was to remove me from school for not coming to school. And then I got shipped off to Florida to live with my mom to try and get me out of trouble. And once you're selling drugs, you're going to gravitate towards selling drugs. There's not that many things easier than selling drugs. They said drugs sell themselves. You don't have to talk drug users into wanting to buy drugs. They already want it. Everybody wants to get high. Everybody wants to get drunk.
Well, and also whenever you're in the hole for some reason, and it's like if the law fucks with you, you're out some money or whatever, what are you gonna do? You're gonna sell more drugs. You're gonna do more crime. When people get out of prison with debt, like a lot of my friends have, that have come out of prison, you come out with debt now. And you what do? You have a criminal conviction, you're struggling to get a regular job. There have been a handful of states like here in New Mexico that have been pushing back against the idea people who have criminal convictions and especially felons shouldn't have any rights and have made it easier to get a job and stuff like that. But it's only a handful of states that have done this. In most states, if you have a serious conviction, especially a felony, you're going to struggle to get any job, even a terrible job.
It's true.
Yeah.
And so what do you do at that point? It's like you're going to take shit from a manager who knows you're a felon for $7.25 an hour at McDonald's, or you're going to sell drugs.
It's
what
true.
Do you think?
I mean, you know,
what would you choose, audience? Like, you tell me.
If you can make more money doing crime because your criminal record works against you for getting a real job, I mean, if you need the money, you're gonna do the crime.
Yeah, and you know, I've always been a leftist. My mom's a leftist, so I was raised as one, and especially considering like I'm indigenous, like we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. We didn't like. I never stood for the flag. My mom never cared about that, and you know, I always just never stood. I just sat there when all the other kids would. So fraud was definitely something that was like easy for me to transition into because I don't care about stealing from corporations, to be honest. Like, I don't give a shit about them and their money. As far as I'm concerned, like, they deserve to be stolen. They deserve to be ripped off. They rip off workers all the time. Like, I knew that going when I first started doing fraud is like, I'm just stealing from other thieves. So as far as I'm concerned, like, and you know, it's less time to do fraud compared to like trafficking. So
it's true.
I was talking about that too. And it's easy money, and you know, easy money and fast money is like, it's always like, it's a hard temptation to break away from, because you know, once you start getting easy money and fast money, like you start to lose the value of like what money is, because it comes quickly and stuff. So like, you know, and then you get bored because you have all this free time. So, you know, I got into gambling and I became a gambling addict too, on top of being a drug addict. And it also magnified my drug addiction because, you know, when I won a lot of money, I would celebrate by getting high. And when I lost a lot of money, I would numb it by getting high. Right. So, and then I would also like hit the mall and drop like a couple grand at any store, any random store and stuff. And
clothes and electronics and video games and all the latest stuff.
Nah, my shit was clothes and shoes.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about this a lot in DMs, but yeah, my shit was my shit was outfits. I only really played Call of Duty, but I never really had a lot of time because I was always on running around and stuff. And then clubbing, I was really into clubbing in my 20s and partying and stuff, and so I never really got into like gaming like crazy like a lot of my friends did. Like it was fun, but it just like I started gaming more when I got sober, to be honest. And even now, like you know, I got 3 kids, so like they hold the TV hostage with cartoons and stuff. Like, you know, I know I'm learning all the Coco Melon songs. I'm watching Paw Patrol way too much. I'm hearing it's the only police that are allowed to be in my house is Paw Patrol. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think that honestly, I really feel you on the getting sober and then discovering video games. I mean, I was into video games when I was a kid. I was big into video games when I was a kid. Super Nintendo was like the holy grail of my life. When that came into my home, it was like, holy shit, everything has changed. The world is different now, you know? But then as I got a little older, and I was working legitimate jobs from a young age and then non-legitimate work and, you know, dealing and stuff like that. Like, the parties were way too attractive. That was more attractive. You know, at that time, it's different. It's totally flipped for me now. But at that time, you know, no video game or other entertainment could beat the partying, and so that's where all the money went back into. Was just
same here. Like
extravagant, stupid lifestyle stuff that you told yourself at the beginning you wouldn't do, because that's how you make the problem worse and blah blah.
Now, since we're talking about making the problem worse, I will take this moment to acknowledge Pearl's comment from earlier, which is that no one gets out of trouble by going to Florida.
No.
Which is true. If it weren't true, there would not be so many Florida man jokes. However, and this is important to mention as well, the reason there are so many Florida man jokes is also because Florida is so poor and so black and so brown, and there are so many rich white people there,
and a lot of undocumented people are in Florida too.
Yes.
So, honestly, like I really don't like the Florida jokes because Florida is like a second home to me. I grew up. I became an adult. I became a man in Tampa, and I did a lot of my most memorable fraud and most memorable drug dealing in Tampa. Because I was going from Los Angeles, from my hood, bringing heroin over to Florida, and for me it was amazing to find out, hey, in Tampa, like they pay like $24,000 for a kilo of heroin, and back where I'm from, I could buy that same kilo for $12,000. So to be able to know oh, I could just drive across country with like 3 or 4 kilos and make like 30 or 40,000 in like 3 weeks. Because I wouldn't drive like straight, because you got to be cognizant of like police and stuff, and I would like stop in places where like I had like friends at, chill and party for like a couple days and then move, keep it moving and stuff. But yeah, so I don't like the Southern jokes, honestly, because I stayed in like St. Pete, on Southside St. Pete, where like it was mostly black, which was different because I grew up in a mostly Hispanic neighborhood, and the Florida I know was not like all white. It was like a mix of black, white, and Hispanic, because it's not like Tampa, Miami, Orlando, Jacksonville, they're melting pots just like any other big blue city. It's the Panhandle that's like different, and like Gainesville that's like different. But
in the swamp, the back swamp.
Yeah, and there's not that much of a remember, Florida's a purple state. Like Obama won it twice.
Yeah.
So this idea that it's a right-wing state is wild, because a black president won there twice, and when the Democrats lose, they lose by like one or 2 points. So
Florida is one of those states where you should look at the fact that the presidency can often shift to the Democrats, but then a lot of offices below that don't. Well, what's going on when you look at that? You look at it's gerrymandering. It's voter suppression. And Florida has some of the worst voter suppression of any state in the country, probably. Although it's really hard to know because there's so many states doing so much voter suppression.
The thing about Florida,
it's a real race to the bottom.
The thing about Florida is that, and I'm not going to joke here, I'm just going to come out and say it, Florida is one of those places where both parties have immensely corrupt political machines.
Yes. Yeah.
And because both political machines for both parties are so corrupt and have their roots in so deep in the places where they're strong, that means who knows what the heck the real results of any election in Florida are. What we do know is that while the Republicans got elected and while they were running the state, they basically gerrymandered it so they would keep running the state. That's why it's been so hard to elect a Democratic governor. That's why it's been so hard to keep the Democratic senators in office, and why they're both senators in Florida are Republican now.
You look at some of these districts in Florida, and they look like some stuff that your kids would draw when they're like 3 years old, just scribbling on some paper, just a bunch of loop-de-loop lines that barely make sense.
Now, mainstream media has beaten this to death with a rock, but it is a fun bit of trivia. Is you know where gerrymander comes from, right?
Nah.
I actually don't.
Okay. I'm surprised, but then again, you guys don't watch mainstream media, so you might have missed it anyway. But one of the place where gerrymander came from is that all the way back in the early days of the country, there was a governor of Pennsylvania named Elbridge Gerry, and as many governors of states did in those days, he finagled his way into the state senate. And while they were drawing up districts, they magically drew this weird congressional district that looked like a salamander. And people wanted to know what the heck happened. Well, that's Jerry's salamander, which eventually just became Jerry's mander, which eventually just became gerrymander.
That's amazing. What the fuck?
Why haven't you tweeted about this? I don't understand.
I don't usually smoke weed on the show, but hearing that story, I might make an exception.
But no, yeah, what's hilarious. This is what makes that story so good is that Elbridge Gerry was like the Bernie Sanders or Angus King of his day. He was an independent who made a big show of not really joining either party. But at the same time, everybody knew that he really was a Jeffersonian, and he really was in with Jefferson and Madison. He just sort of played at being independent. But he was also buddies with John Adams, who was also made a big deal about being independent, but was sort of a Federalist. And he was the person that John Adams sent to France at the last minute to prevent the quasi-war from becoming a real war. So he was someone who had this huge respect from both sides of the aisle and was seen as an independent. But there he was drawing this funky congressional district so that Democratic Republicans could win it instead of Federalists.
I mean, I will say this about gerrymandering. As far as it's not fair, but at the same time, it's like, what difference does it make if it was fixed? Because, the Democrats would win those areas, and
but that's the thing, is the way that it's drawn like that and the way they do it. It's part of the way they work together to fix it in a larger sense, so that nobody really has a chance of changing much. Because what gerrymanders do, this is how whichever side is in power gets the loser to agree to the gerrymander, mind you. Gerrymanders protect incumbents. Gerrymanders are nearly always drawn up in such a way. And it was actually a big deal that they did not do this in Texas recently, by the way, where they redrew Texas so that Austin will actually have fewer seats. And other big cities too. The Republicans really were even harder than they usual in getting rid of districts to get rid of the Democrats who are in Congress from those districts. But usually they protect incumbents. And that's usually why both sides agree to the gerrymanders, because, the Republicans add more seats, but all the Democrats get to keep their seats. And they were in the minority anyway, so who really cares? Except, of course, the people of the state who have just been fucked over by the Democrats who are supposed to be fighting for them against the Republican majority.
But the thing with Democrat voters, and this is everywhere, they get lied to all the time and they don't care. They still vote. So, I mean, how many people said they're voting for Biden because they were going to do this for trans people? He was going to do $15 minimum wage. He was going to do cancel student debt.
And let's talk about the two real accomplishments on any sort of progressive level of the Biden administration so far. Those are trans people could go back into the military to kill brown people? Biden did help with that. Biden did fix that. He was there. He was there for trans people who wanted to get back into the military as quickly as possible. And we now have draft equality, which is a big step forward for feminism. Just ask Hillary Clinton. Which is to say, women now have to register for selective service the same as men, and are liable to be drafted into the military the same as men.
Yep.
Now, let's be clear. Originally, and this is a little bit sexist, but you still need someone. You still need someone. The whole idea is that you did not want to deprive the child of both parents. And so you did certain things to make it easier for the mother to stay home.
Well, I think we should be talking about the fact that, like, when I was young, we were talking about possibly more or less abolishing the draft in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's a movement that has kind of died.
Totally.
Well, favor of this. In fact, I would say it's totally dead. I really don't.
Well, that's because
know that many people that are teaching or propagating that stuff now.
That's because while they didn't end the draft at law, they did end the draft as policy. There hasn't actually been a draft since Vietnam.
Yeah, because I don't think we're ever going to have a draft. I mean, like, if that would actually
if we went to or if we ended up in a real war with China, we would have to have a draft if it didn't go nuclear, if it lasted any amount of time. A real war with China would require a draft. And if Biden doesn't get there, the Republican who wins in 2024 will. I really think that that's the way we're headed, is war with China.
Really?
I think that it's a mistake, even though I'm not trying to pretend that China is perfect. I think it's a mistake to give some of the more obvious mainstream media lies about China too much credence, which is one thing I know some people who claim to be anarchists kind of do.
Even a lot of, other sort of socialist, communist leaning types, because we know anyone who calls himself a democratic socialist is going to spout propaganda about China 90% of the time, which, like, there's this attitude towards places like China and North Korea that you're only being fair if you condemn them. I would like to be able to have fair conversations about these places. I think that there's some things that we could talk about in China that aren't great. I also think that, home ownership in China is way better than the United States.
Yes.
The rates of child hunger are lower than the United States at this point. Like, there's a lot of things that they're beating us on, and we should maybe look into that stuff instead of only talking about what's possibly wrong there all the time.
Best fact. When people like Steven Pinker and other capitalism has lifted people out of poverty, whack jobs, point to the people that capitalism has actually lifted out of poverty. The people capitalism has lifted out of poverty were lifted out of poverty in China, which sure has been forced to enter the capitalist global market, but is still awfully socialist compared to the United States or even Western Europe.
Yeah, plus the majority of the poorest people in the third world are operating under capitalist systems. That ignored when they're arguing
outright libertarian conditions in many cases, because let's not forget that the CIA put all these people in power in these little countries who basically were getting their economic knowledge from Milton Friedman directly. He went to Chile, remember? Milton Friedman went to Chile to consult with Pinochet. He went with Spain to consult with Franco. They sent a lot of his stuff around Africa, even though Friedman was too important to go to Africa himself, probably because he was racist. But that's a whole different conversation.
Well, I would like to bring up China too, because I have a pretty unique viewpoint of it being in Samoa. Samoa,
of course,
like most people don't know this, but Samoa was the first UN nation to recognize the Communist Party of China as the leadership of China. So they kickstarted the rest of the UN doing that. And 20% of Samoans have Chinese blood because 500 years ago, a bunch of Chinese immigrants came over here, and they stayed. So we're very close allies with China out here. But at the same time, we are also getting economically colonized by China. And with the leadership of Samoa allowing it to happen. That's what our last election was pretty much about, was that, China owns half of our debt, and they were trying to reclaim that debt through austerity by taking indigenous land. And people need to understand, like, indigenous land here, people bury their parents on their land. They bury their grandparents on their land, their great grandparents, thousands of years of their ancestors have been buried on this land. So when you take their land, you're taking their whole heritage and culture too. And the government here, the PM here, took land without asking for permission, gave money that they decided was value to those people, and gave it to China to make a port that a lot of people in the Pacific think was going to be a military base. So we had a party called FAST that was created just a year ago. And a year ago, they had 0 seats in parliament. Now they have the majority. And the new prime minister is FAST prime minister, who also used to be the vice prime minister in HRP. She left because specifically because of this port thing. I believe it was part of her family that had their land taken. So it was a personal issue for her. So she left the party, and then FAST became popular in Savai'i, which is a tourist area. And we've had our border closed for the whole COVID, which means we also didn't have COVID, which is a good thing. But at the same time, this is, of course, yeah. And Savai'i got hit the hardest because of it. Our stimulus check here was $20 for the year. So as Americans are complaining about $600, $1,400 checks, $1,200 checks, we got $20 for a year for a stimulus check. And with 30% of the population out of work because they worked at hotels and they worked at restaurants and bars. And then there's also a residual effect because when those people lose their jobs, well, those are also consumers who used to purchase stuff at all the other stores. So then there's a domino effect where those businesses lose money too. And
well, it's really workers that drive the economy. I mean, tourists pay the workers, but it's always studies prove over and over again. It's always workers that actually keep an economy running. It's the workers going out to eat after work and buying their kids new backpacks and stuff like that. And
this is why when you see an economist who works for a think tank called the Tax Foundation go on cable news and say, hey, we really should consider a value-added tax because taxing consumption is the best way to go. That's when you should remember that is probably a Koch brothers economist who is pushing a Koch point of view. And it turns out a friend of mine looked up the Tax Foundation, and indeed, the director the chairman of the board of the tax foundation is a Chucky Coke employee.
Well, I mean, we deal with a lot with custom taxes out here. So like customs is like 38%. So like most American goods are double what they cost in America, yet 80% of this country makes $1.25 an hour. So, you know, not only are they making way less, 10 times less than what Americans make minimum wage, they're also paying double what Americans have to pay for like stuff like iPhones and stuff like, you know, PS4. Yes. Stuff like the food's cheap and alcohol can be cheap too, but anything
that has to come in from out of the country is a cost a fortune.
Yeah. So, and you know, people here, they want American things too. They want Nike stuff. They want Adidas. They want Apple phones. They want Samsung phones. So,
and what's funny is some people would say that there's something unreasonable about that, as if some people are entitled to be allowed to want those things and some people are not, right? Well, why is it wrong for a bunch of people in Samoa to want nice sneakers? It's not.
Let's also not pretend the reason they want those things is because American movies make it to Samoa eventually. American television makes it to Samoa eventually in some form or another.
Not eventually. We actually get Marvel movies first before America.
Ah, yes, that's a good point. And a lot of stuff that a lot of American culture makes it to Samoa, not just Samoa either, all over the world. I mean, heck, one of the biggest movies in the world was Black Panther. Now, Black Panther had a lot of good stuff in it, but it also had a CIA agent as one of the good guys. So the rest of the world gets exposed to this idea of the CIA agent as this happy sidekick to the king of an African country, when that's not the way it really works. If the Black Panther was a real person, the real CIA would be plotting to assassinate him.
I actually haven't seen Black Panther. I haven't seen 99% of Marvel movies or any.
But a lot of people around the world have.
Yeah.
They made a lot of money in India and China. Now, China is a quote-unquote communist country, and we can argue about whether their form of state capitalism is really socialism or not. But they're a communist country that is trying to evolve their system, at least in theory, towards some sort of effort to achieve communism at some time in the future and to achieve socialism at some sooner point in the future when possible. The United States isn't pretending about any of that. I mean, we're not even acknowledging that we want socialism one day, let alone communism.
That's true. But I will say, though, that, you know, I mean, you could say China is a communist country, but in reality, they're also keeping their workers underpaid to benefit.
So let's talk about that, because this is a good point, because Kennedy mentioned North Korea. Cuba gets talked about a lot and has been in the news this past year since Biden became president. So what's different about Cuba and North Korea versus China? Well, China and North Korea were both approached after World War II, after the Cold War ended, and were both given similar conditions, which was, you open up your economy and you open up your society a little, and we'll get off your back and sell you stuff, and you'll be able to sell us stuff, and everybody will make money, and you'll still be able to have health care and take care of your people. But we can be friends instead of enemies. And China was, okay, we'll sort of give this a try. Whereas North Korea was, fuck no. And Cuba was, well, we have to talk about all this first. And so North Korea was completely isolated. The country that said outright no was completely isolated. the country that said, well, we need to take care of all of this stuff first, naturally had all those things totally ignored, especially the embargo that really causes them a lot of grief, because people ask about this all the time. So I'll explain it once more. As COVID is reminding anyone who has seen the sign at Taco Bell saying, we're sorry, we may not have some menu items available because of supply chain issues, COVID has made it hard to get things from various places to other various places around the world and country. Because of this, supply chains have sort of broken down a little bit in some places, not always in huge ways, but in little ways here and there. And so we're seeing how much stuff actually goes through the United States or ends up in the United States before going somewhere else. And when you're dealing with an embargo like the U.S. embargo against Cuba, there's a lot of stuff from Mexico or China that would normally go straight, that if it were being purchased in the U.S., would come straight to the U.S. from Mexico or China. But because it's being purchased in some other place that isn't the U.S., it goes through the U.S. first because it's technically an American product. Like the iPhone, which is made in China, as we all know, but which goes through the U.S. first if you're buying it anywhere else but the U.S. Even the Chinese iPhone, which is made in the same factory as the American iPhone, is shipped to the U.S. and back to China.
Yeah, I was going to make that point because my store is actually a phone store, and we buy from Apple and Samsung distributors in America. And, when I was in LA, we used to sell to Chinese companies. And it was funny that they had to come through American companies to buy stuff that is literally down the street being made from them.
Well, before Trump, this is a big deal, before Trump, recycler iPhones went from the US to China and got sold as new iPhones. It's not how it works anymore, but that's how it used to work. Now they go to South Korea and India.
I mean, because they did put tariffs on iPhones and before Trump and American.
Oh, I know.
Phones. And I remember we had a customer that was Chinese, American Chinese, that used to buy like hundreds of phones from us, and he would basically smuggle them by flying over to get out of paying the tariffs so that he could sell it for cheaper than everyone else.
I used to do tech support for Apple Care, and I would talk to people all the time, usually in the Middle East or Africa, who were basically coming to the States and buying a bunch of phones cheap in the States without the big markups that they get in Africa and the Middle East. And then going back to Africa or the Middle East and jailbreaking those phones and selling them over there.
Yeah, because, most of the world uses GSM phones, so they're all, it's all SIM card.
Well, but that's the whole thing now, is that because of the way that the 4G and the 5G technology works, the phones, the technology is becoming more standardized again. Certain kinds of phones that used to be strictly American are now used in South Korea and Taiwan and Japan and Australia. And certain kinds of phones that were strictly European are now used in the US. And there's a lot more mix. And some of the new internet technology requires that your phone be at least a little bit compatible with GSM, even if it's CDMA.
Yeah.
That's why the iPhone 5 and 6, I don't know what it's like with newer phones. That's how long it's been since I worked for Apple Care. But out of the box, the iPhone 5 and 6 were basically in a setup where you could use them with just about anybody if they hadn't been programmed into a set of bands for a specific country yet. But once they were programmed into a set of bans for a specific country, they worked a certain way for that country, period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because, like, you know, if I always hear about people getting banned on Twitter and like they have to like spend days trying to get back on. If I got banned on Twitter, I could just go to Vodafone or Digicel, buy a SIM card for $2, and just switch it, and now I got a new IP and all.
Yeah,
I can make an account right away, like within seconds of getting banned,
yeah.
or just put it on my second phone and all. And I hear other people like they have all these problems because they're using lock carrier phones and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's kind of funny to deal with. But it also, what's interesting about that is it makes stealing phones easier, the SIM card thing, because you know, you just you can grab a phone, just throw the SIM card away, put a new SIM card in, and there's no way to really track or locate it if you disable the GPS on it.
Yeah, it's true.
And we have no addresses in Samoa. Like, everyone has to use PO boxes. And just like how on reservations, like, you know, there's no addresses there. There's no addresses in American Samoa. So even if they did enable location, like, yeah, you're gonna get to, like, they will track it to like a village, but all these houses are like clustered together. So how is the police gonna figure out, like, out of 5 houses, which house is this phone?
It depends. If they're the Philadelphia cops, you drop a bomb on the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, here, like,
I had to make that comment. I'm sorry.
You should.
Well, the police don't even carry guns here. They keep them at the station, and they like it's not until like someone pulls a gun on them and then they go get their guns and then come back.
Like, you know, in the UK, the only people in city PDs with guns are the SWAT team. Now think about that. The only people with guns in the entire city police department are the SWAT team. And the SWAT team almost never does anything. Their guns are almost always locked up, and they all have other things that they do for the cops most of the time.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, I like the police out in Samoa because, you know, one thing that is really chill about them, they give warnings. They give a lot of so, like, pull you over and they'll warn you they won't give you a ticket. They'll warn you a bunch of times, and you know it's you know, small island, so you see each other. You see each other.
That makes a difference.
And like this, you know, 70% of the police force here, they smoke weed despite the fact it's illegal. And
I lived in Tennessee. In Tennessee, the weed is being sold by the cops. So, I mean, I get it.
I remember one time I saw this thing where the cops were burning all this weed.
Oh, yes.
But then you look, and if you knew anything about weed, they had cut the tops off the plants. They were burning the bottoms of the plants. Well,
the actual weed is on the top.
Where did the tops of the plants go? That's where the good shit is.
And the answer is, it doesn't matter which city we're talking about. The answer is the cops took it and put it in an evidence locker for long enough for people to forget about it, and then delivered it basically to their hand-picked confidential informants who sold it and gave them a cut.
I mean, it's worth noting in this situation, the sophistication of it was such that they took uncured weed and cured it themselves. So clearly they knew what they were doing. I mean, they're presenting it as, oh yeah, look, we busted this grow op. We're burning all the plants, and you look at it, they're burning stems and leaves.
Yeah. It's absolutely hilarious because the cops are selling that stuff.
It happens here. I mean,
most of the way it worked in Tennessee is the cops were everybody's suppliers. And if your dealer didn't work for the cops, they were the ones who got arrested all the time. The drug dealers who didn't get arrested were the ones who ultimately worked for someone who was being supplied by the cops.
We recently had a our police commissioner just resigned during the transfer of power. He's a former LAPD officer, and I'd found out. Now this is a rumor. I don't know for sure if it's fact, but I'd found out that the reason why he left the LAPD is because he got caught with a 16-year-old, and they forced him to resign. And then he came to Samoa, and he got offered the commissioner job because of all his experience.
So I will tell you why I'm cynical about that story. I'm from Southern California. I have a certain amount of knowledge of the LAPD. It would have to be really extraordinary circumstances for them to make a cop resign just because he got caught with a teenager. I mean, this is a department where I believe cops have walked, despite the fact that they have committed what would be statutory rape if they were not cops, even beyond the fact that these were people in police custody. So there's no possible way they could be said to be legitimately consenting when they're in police custody and are in a situation where the police have power over them like that. So even if they say they're consenting, well, their consent is obviously an attempt to gain favor from the people with power over them and isn't entirely free.
Well, I would say this was interesting about this commissioner is, he went and busted all the weed growers and all the weed drug lords when we have a very huge ice problem, which is meth, slang for meth.
Yeah.
Somehow the ice dealers never really got touched. And this guy happens to have a cousin who is an ice dealer in town, which is very peculiar, and that guy never got touched.
So how much you want to talk about the Los Angeles Police Department?
I mean, we can.
Because the one thing, when you mention meth, one thing that's very important to understand about Los Angeles is in the 50s, when gangsters were going to jail in various parts of the country on tax evasion charges, the LAPD was there when to make the arrest for the IRS when Bugsy Siegel's number 2 guy, Mickey Cohen, went to prison for tax evasion. And when Mickey Cohen went to prison for tax evasion, the LAPD basically told all the guys who are working for him, you work for us now. And they took over the drug and sex businesses. And to the best of my knowledge, I mean, most of that, except for specific stuff in specific neighborhoods, is still the cops at the top.
I mean, I wouldn't say that now, to be honest, because I mean, I was in the neighborhood.
I'm not talking so much about South LA, to be fair.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the nice drug trade. And
I mean, my neighborhood Mexican mafia connected, so like
and that makes a difference.
It's a couple degrees away from the cartel because the cartel uses the Mexican mafia to sell.
But then the cartel all work for Mexican cops.
Yeah, they don't work. They pay off Mexican cops.
There's a whole bunch. There's a whole bunch of complicated stuff down there. There was the one. There's one state in Mexico where the cartel boss was the general who was also the police chief, and real fun stuff like that.
They they'll install into these positions and stuff. The Mexican mafia does the same thing in prisons and stuff.
Of course,
get people to go get a job as a security guard, so they can help smuggle drugs in, because there's so much money you can make even in prison and stuff. And most of the Mexican mafia guys, they're locked up, so they're calling shots from prison to streets. The cartel guys, like, when you're locked up, you never really know who they are, to be honest.
That's true.
Go with the Pisces, and they're not going to talk about it, because if they do, then the feds are going to try and pick up their cases and all, and no one wants to get their case picked up by the feds, because
even if they don't, I mean, the guy running the Mexican mafia in California was locked up in solitary just to stop him from talking to anyone else in his organization.
Yeah. But like, there's a huge difference between getting state sent in LA compared to getting the feds picked up. Because, you know, we have such an overcrowding problem in California, especially in Southern California, that if you get locked up, like, my cousin got a year and he got let go after like 3 months, you know, sentence complete. So I think the actual law is like 50, you do 50%, but if you're a nonviolent criminal, you're probably going to do a lot less. But if you are gang affiliated, they're probably going to make you do all the 50%. But if you're getting picked up with Fed charges, you're doing 85, 87% of that time.
That's true.
They're making you do all that time. And then I know with my dad, they actually like hit him with extra time for state crimes he had already been convicted of, which is some weird thing. Like, he'd have to explain it, because I was always confused about why that happened. Because I'm like, how can you do time for state?
Because the feds are crooked.
Yeah.
Well, and also this gets back to like liberalism and liberal policing that we kind of started on way earlier. Is that like they've created a lot of these laws that are like basically these like bad apple kind of laws of different types, 3 strikes, 0 tolerance. They have different names that they use for them, but they all lead to the same place, which is that like if you're a troublemaker, then and troublemakers just in quotes here, and it's just this thing that gets applied to people at random. And let me tell you something, when I say at random, I mean at random pretty much entirely, with the exception that there is a bias of economic class that you have to account for.
There is
but
also,
aside from that, it's random. They are not catching the actual problem kids at a lot of schools. Like even if your goal was to catch and punish the worst kids at schools, and that should not be your goal, but let's say it was, that's not being accomplished. They're just catching kids at random. It's just a net that just happens to catch some kids, and the things that kids get like sent to juvie for and shit like that, a lot of times it's stuff that every kid is doing, right? Like every kid graffitis something while they're a teenager once. You know, it might be a small thing. It might be a very small act, but pretty much every teenager graffitis something. You write your name on the wall somewhere. You know, you write the name of your crush under the bridge or whatever. If you're caught for that by the wrong cop and you're the wrong person, it ruins your life for no reason.
And there's one way in which it's not random. And this is important to mention. LA, Los Angeles specifically, I know has a division like this. And my assumption is that most cities have a division like this. Los Angeles has a group called the Special Investigation Squad, whose job is to watch people with 2 strikes and deliberately maneuver them through a combination of undercover work and surveillance to try to commit a crime that would be worth the 3rd strike so they can arrest and or kill them. And there's nothing random about that at all. They have dossiers of people.
Don't forget, there's door number 3, Chris.
Yes.
There's door number 3. Make them into a CI.
Yes. Well, but no, that particular group is much more famous for deliberately killing people than anything else.
Oh, for
I believe
sure.
they have accidentally arrested people from time to time.
And it's horrible. They offer you your life and freedom in exchange for being a narc.
Yeah.
And that's the life of people who end up in that situation is terrible, and they get very little out of it other than just barely having their freedom. If you can count being free, having an organization like the police just picking you up once a week to harass you and ask you questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty great.
Yeah.
Also, last time it was Chris. This time it's me. I'm gonna have to deal with this cat for 1 second. They are fucking go crazy in here. I got to get them out of here.
You know, by the way, if I leave the screen, you know, I am at my store, so that's just me, customer.
No worries. No worries.
I will say this: like, I got snitched on twice.
Mm-hmm.
One time I beat my case, so I really wasn't. The last time I got snitched on, and I beat my case, so I didn't really care, and it gave me time to like reflect on where my life was going to be 10 years from that point, and all I saw was like prison. So I actually am thankful for the person that snitched on me, ironically, because you know I was like I was living a very chaotic life on you know making money and getting high and gambling. So like jail allowed me to slow down my life and like reevaluate like where's my life heading. And all I saw was prison, because you know I saw so many kids that were younger than me with doing the same type of stuff that were getting like 5, 10, 15 years, and all I saw was like, man, young lives wasted. And like I didn't want to be that. You know, I didn't want to be like in prison, like, you know, until I was in my 40s and stuff. So in one way, like, you know, whoever snitched on me, like, they did me a favor. You know, I wouldn't have 3 kids right now if it wasn't for that snitching. I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't be with my wife right now if it wasn't for that snitching. I wouldn't be in Samoa right now. And, you know, I'm not making as much money as I used to make, but it's legal, it's honest, and it's chill. I mean, I'm able to do this show in the middle of my workday.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I, you know, actually, my homeboy was just he was here like earlier this morning, and he was just asking me like, would you trade being like famous and or your life, or would you rather have your life that you have right now? And I told him my first answer to that was, well, do I get to keep my kids and my girl? Because of course I would take being famous if I get to keep them, because that comes with extra money. And but otherwise, if it's the choice of like keeping like getting fame and getting rich, but I lose my girl and my kids, like, no, I'm happy now. You know, I'm clean. All I need. I am on Xanax prescription because I got bad anxiety and PTSD. But otherwise, like, I live a pretty calm life now. It's slow, which is good for an ex-addict. And you know, I do have a hobby of shoe collecting and stuff. In like some of my shopping. But you know, I like living in Samoa, to be honest. Especially when people tell me to leave the country on Twitter, and I'm like, I already did. I'm already in the country. I'm like, but no, Samoa's pretty chill, but not for most people, because you know, like I said, 80% of this country makes $1.25 an hour. So, and they're struggling hard. But if you come here making American wage, or you can open up a business, there is a lot of room there, because like I said, you know, so many people overcharge. Like, my store is the cheapest on the island for brand new phones, and some of our phones are like a few $100s less than like everyone else, including Vodafone, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. You know, it's the biggest phone company in New Zealand, one of the biggest phone companies in India, and they price their stuff to the market here, where they could easily be pricing it at this price. But hey, hold on real quick. Seiko, would you be able to go pick up Andrew from school? Is it 3:00 right now? It's 2 to 4. Oh yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So Andrew's my oldest son, so he's getting. So I was asking my friend to go pick him up from preschool. 3-hour preschool. It's a private school, and I'm like, I don't understand why I got to pay for him to go to private school for 3 hours, especially when like one of those hours is like lunch.
That's what a grift. Oh my God.
You got to figure 3 hours of preschool. So you've got 1 hour of lunch and 1 hour of nap. So you're actually paying for 1 hour of preschool.
Yeah. He is learning English, which is good through songs, but they're a little like, they've told me don't sag, and I'm like, well, this is American style. And then they got an issue. We bleached his hair recently for White Sunday. They're like asking me about like, why'd you bleach his hair? And I'm like, I pay you guys. Like, you don't pay me. Like, I'm like, how are you telling me what to do with my kid? And like, unless you want to like feed him, clothe him, and start paying our rent, it's. I'll be honest though, like his teacher is my girl's cousin, so like she has a little bit more opinions than a regular teacher probably would have.
That makes a difference sometimes.
It does make a difference.
And I look a lot different than the other parents there.
I bet.
I mean,
I'm just guessing that there are certain aspects of your personal style that are not typical for Samoa.
Tattoos are normal. Tribal tattoos are normal in Samoa. But my tattoos aren't so normal.
Yeah.
So like, especially because I've.
Michael, we're losing you a little bit.
Yeah, we lost your sound, Michael. Yeah, we appear to have lost Michael's sound for the moment. Let me see something here.
No, it's not that.
No. It's something on his side.
Michael, check your settings and maybe try disconnecting and reconnecting the StreamYard because something's not right.
I don't know if he can hear us.
I don't know if you can hear us. Oh, no. There's bound to be some problems when you're calling in from this far, honestly, so it's good that we haven't had too many.
Let's see if I...
There we pressed something wrong.
There we go. Now we can hear you.
I accidentally pressed something.
No worries. I hear you.
I really hate when people like call and you don't answer, and then they start texting, right? And you don't answer the text, and they keep texting. It's like there's no respect for the fact that like someone's like maybe they're busy and that's why they're not answering. That's my biggest pet peeve. Like I'm heated right now because it's happening by like 2 people. And one of them knows that I'm on this show right now, so that's even more annoying.
Well, it's all good. You're back now.
Now I'm getting a text. You all right? Like, yes, I'm all right. Like, literally, you just called like 5 minutes ago. I'm allowed to not be around for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know some people like that.
For some reason, it's muted. How do I get the volume back?
I can hear you.
Can you not hear us? Uh-oh.
That's why he couldn't hear us before.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Well, let's circle back to China real quick while we try to sort this out and just say that, we don't have to buy into the idea that China is perfect or terrible necessarily. You know, like we can view it just as a place that exists in this world and has problems and good things about it and whatever. And it's important to try to view it at least somewhat fairly like that, because the propaganda, if it's not pushing for outright war, like Chris has suggested, which I don't think is impossible by any means, I think at the very least, they're pushing to put us into a Cold War situation.
I hear you now.
You hear us now?
Sorry.
Good.
Yeah, no worries. So they're pushing us into like a Cold War situation, if nothing else, with China, and that's why we have to push back against the propaganda, even if we also, gotta be clear about where that line stops, because China doesn't just get a pass on everything.
No,
but at the same time, we have to push back against this propaganda that is, trying to keep us in this cycle of Cold War, because that is a cycle of economic desperation, military escalation, fear, propaganda, all bad things.
Let's all remember, and this is important to understand. Michael knows this, but let's all understand that when the United States criticizes China on human rights or criticizes Cuba on human rights, the United States is the last country in the world to have any standing to criticize any other country in the world on human rights. And yet it consistently does so anyway. Now, the reason for that is so that they can always attack their own biggest weakness. But they're not doing anything to improve human rights here. And it comes down to whataboutism. The same way the Republicans what about Democrats, America's what abouting China.
Yeah. And, if we're going to start doing stuff like that, we got to start meeting some metrics. You can't talk shit about Cuba while our health expectancy is lower. You can't talk shit about China when the millennial homeownership rate in China is nearly double ours. You gotta stop and turn the shit talking inward. Okay, we should only be talking shit about ourselves until some shit changes around here.
Let's talk about the fact that China has the death penalty for like 500 crimes, and we have the death penalty for like 2, and we still kill more people than China every year.
What is up with that? And that's the kind of stuff that you'll see propaganda about. China still allows the death penalty on all these crimes, and occasionally they use it on a more esoteric crime than we would, because we only use it for and that makes people alarmed, and sometimes it should. I am not saying
that I believe that Americans should shoot people who run red lights in the head. I'm not. However, I will say that the Chinese approach to capital punishment is basically anyone who is recklessly risking the lives of their fellow citizens is a potential murderer and is liable to be treated as a potential murderer by the law. It makes sense whether we agree with it or not, whereas not every law in America makes that kind of clear sense.
And what's wild is we've talked about China off and on in this conversation. We've had a fairly nuanced conversation about it. We've not really said that China is good or bad outright, but just this little bit of praising China, just these couple minutes of saying China's doing some things right. People are so propagandized to hate China outright that they will look at this clip and they'll go, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you? How could you do this? China's a terrible place. Don't you understand?" It's like, I live in a terrible imperial country. What are you talking about?
Let's go back to the core issue. American American courts kill more people than Chinese courts, even though China has more capital crimes on the books. American cops kill more people than Chinese cops, even though there are more Chinese cops than Chinese people. Now, mind you, Chinese cops don't have the arsenal that American cops do. They're not fully militarized, but there's a lot of them. They have fire.
And in some ways, they have more legal leeway.
Since the last time China had a war, there's at least 20 Americans.
Oh, we've lost Michael again.
This time I think it's just connection.
I think so.
Michael, try that again.
I think he's frozen again. Michael, can you hear us? This is what happens with technology that can span the world. It eventually is spanning the world.
Well, you know.
But I mean,
overall,
but
we can try. We can see if we get Michael back.
Can you hear me?
Despite all those,
we hear you. Do you hear us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think my connection.
I think it is connection.
Sure, I'm gonna leave and come back and see if it fixes it.
Okay. Just think, if it wasn't for capitalism, how much better this technology would be that we're fighting with right now.
It'd be so much easier to get really good service in Samoa if it weren't for capitalism.
I mean, you know, we were supposed to have...
that's a very good point.
We were supposed to have fiber internet across this whole country. And even that, I mean, that wouldn't connect us directly to Samoa with faster internet, but it would make everything faster and more stable here, and it would make it easier to do shows like this.
Yeah.
We were supposed to have that. The government paid for it. Our tax dollars paid for it. And the corporations just ran away with that money. Happens all the time. It's another forgotten story. Now, you know.
Let them run away with it. That's the worst part.
Hello, can you hear me better now? I reset it.
Yeah, can you hear us better?
Yeah. So,
all right.
What are we on?
So, yeah.
What topic are you?
I was just saying, you know,
but we were talking about China mostly. So
we kill fewer people than China. I mean, we kill more people than China, even though China has more capital crimes. We have a higher percentage of our population in prison than China, even though China is considered a police state. So
also, like, China war was the Korean War, and we've had like 30 wars since they've had their last war.
Yeah,
and that doesn't get talked
about. Let's not forget the fact. Well, actually, they've had a couple wars since Korea. They had a very short war with India.
Oh yeah. They did that, and then they recently had a
sure.
And they had recently, yes, they very, very nearly came to war again, and they did skirmish a little.
And you know, the main thing is that I just think we need to be careful and consistent.
Just recently,
you know, we have to be careful and consistent in how we describe these things. We can't say that Xi Jinping is a dictator, but then say that Angela Merkel, who blatantly like pocketed Germany for like 2 decades against the will of a lot of people, is, you know, just a democratic leader. That's fine. Nothing to, you know, if we're going to say that some elections are rigged and untrustworthy and people are in office are for too long, I agree with you. I agree. I believe in short-term limits for politicians and things like that. But let's be consistent.
Hey, now if some folks are dictators, then why isn't Angela Merkel a dictator? Why wasn't Margaret Thatcher a dictator? She was in power for a long time.
Long time.
People forget how long Margaret Thatcher was in power sometimes.
Long time. And let's be clear too, you know, in the UK, you don't elect your prime minister directly at all. So if we're going to say that someone might be a dictator, well, this person who controls the party and forces them to choose her over and over again to rule the country, and you don't even get to say, you don't even have a say in who that person is actually.
You do. You have a vote in the party for party leadership, but
realistically, you don't have a lot of control over it.
Well,
it depends on the election. Corbyn supporters had a lot of control over it for quite a few years.
Yeah, it depends on the party somewhat.
Yeah, because I mean, even here in Samoa, you do have control over who gets to be in charge of the party for the most part. Like, you know, the people that get to be in charge, they get picked the same way that anyone else in like America gets to be in charge of like a primary win and stuff. You know, it's usually bluster, a lot of blustering and lies usually gets you to be parliament leader. I mean, we had a guy who just lost, and he did the same thing that everyone was afraid Trump would do. He literally stayed in office 3 months after the new prime minister got sworn in, and he refused to leave.
Rachel Maddow actually did a segment on it in order to compare the guy to Trump.
Yeah, and I thought that was hilarious because
so you know,
this guy has been prime minister for 23 years. The party has been in charge for 36 years.
Yes.
And he didn't learn shit from Trump. If anything, like he's been like this his whole time.
That's
borrowing from like him.
That's how he's been in power for 23 years.
Right.
I thought it was disrespectful because, you know, Samoans know how to be corrupt on our own. We don't need to learn from America.
Well, but that's the whole thing. Is, I mean, the whole reason it was brought up was specifically to make the Trump comparison. If the Trump comparison had not been there to be made, right or wrong, Rachel Maddow would never have mentioned this. This would be just another third world dictator staying in power. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As far as the U.S. is concerned, I mean.
Yep. So
I'm just gonna drop off just for 2 seconds. I'll be.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, his connection was going again. I could tell.
So, you know, let's just be consistent in how we view these things. That's all I care about, because I don't think that China should be above criticism by any means. I just don't think that another Cold War is going to do us any good.
Can we
my wife was texting me about like what to eat for dinner tonight.
No worries, no worries.
Can we at least agree, though, that when people are saying free Tibet, what they really mean is give the Dalai Lama his slaves back?
Oh, we should never give the Dalai Lama anything. Let's just be clear about that.
Because this is something that Hollywood celebrities have latched onto, thinking that it's radical and cool, the whole free Tibet thing. It was big in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And China hawks still love to talk about Tibet. And there's always some person who claims to be an anarchist or left communist on the internet who says, well, what about Tibet in any China conversation? And anarchists and left communists should not be saying, what about Tibet? Because the question of free Tibet comes down to giving the Dalai Lama his slaves back. And that is not freedom for anyone but the Dalai Lama.
What they would have Tibet be would be feudalism, straight up. A form of feudalism.
Well, it's a lot of DSA people that are always.
There's a certain kind of person that thinks any kind of decentralization is always good. And now I'm not a pure
Well, Chris,
centralization type
No,
person.
if
I
there
think
was,
that sometimes things should balkanize or break apart to become better. But
if there was a democratic Free Tibet movement, that might be different. But there isn't a democratic Free Tibet movement. There's the people who want to bring the Dalai Lama back because, yay, Buddhism. And there's the people who are relatively happy with the way things are because, yay, modern medicine. And there's an irreconcilable difference between some of these people. And part of it is class. A lot of the people who want the Dalai Lama back had power under the feudal system of Tibet, whereby everyone was technically a slave to the Dalai Lama, but the nobles were this special higher class slave who got to run the rest of the population.
mm-hmm. Yeah, not a great system.
But
Pretty
if
bad
there were
for
a democratic
average.
Free Tibet movement, that might be worth talking about.
Yeah, and I think also like there's just too much evidence that people have been legitimately by meaningful metrics brought out of poverty in places like Tibet.
I say fuck that.
Yeah,
I say fuck Tibet, fuck Buddhism.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism isn't necessarily all bad, but here's what I'll say.
Are you guys able to hear me right now?
A little bit. You're a little bit choppy.
We're able to hear you, and then you freeze.
Yeah, you're a little choppy and delayed for sure. I don't think Buddhism is necessarily all bad in the same way that we had Jory Micah on and we talked about how Christianity isn't necessarily all bad. But there's a reason why Buddhism has been let through the door of imperialism, so to speak.
No religion is all bad. But when you have people who say...
Except Scientology, maybe.
Well, okay, Scientology is all bad, so let's. There is that.
I'm on let me reset. Let me reset my phone. I'll be.
And as Jory would want me to mention,
let me reset my phone, and I'll be back in
all bad. Get rid of the Southern Baptists. But that stuff aside.
Yeah. Handful of exceptions aside.
No religion is all bad. There's a lot of good stuff in Buddhism. Just like there's a lot of good stuff in Christianity. But the problem is that when you have a religion like that, which is built around enlightened mysticism, let's call it, which is that sort of individual salvation. First, that individual salvation is kind of an individualistic religion to a certain degree. And there's a certain selfishness about it. If it's that sort of individualistic mysticism. I think mysticism is important. I think more people should pay attention to mysticism. But I also think that it's good to know that what all religions share is that when they're talking about the spirit of the love of God, they're talking about a communal experience between people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the communal experience between people that really matters more than the divine stuff that's going on.
Yeah. Well,
and
I think
at its best, Buddhism is more honest about some of the divine stuff, not necessarily really being all that divine. But at the same time, there's no such thing as a perfect religion either. Any enlightenment religion has a true to the roots enlightenment for the underclass version that still survives, but it also has a ruling class version that basically just justifies entrenched prejudices. Yeah, and in Tibet, Buddhism justified the feudal slave culture.
Yep.
One thing I don't like about Buddhism is like they believe that if you're born poor, it's because you were a shitty person in your previous life.
It's true.
If you're born rich, you are good person in your previous life, and
that
you
is
poor and you deserve to be rich.
that is something that is believed very strongly in more conservative Buddhism.
Yeah, it's a predominant conservative Buddhist belief that's pretty popular around the world. And yeah, and it's it's even been suspected that this is like a cultural predisposition that has allowed like more fascist governments to, you know, take power at times. Not to say that we don't have our own cultural predispositions that allow this. I'm just saying that, you know, every culture has unique predispositions that can be taken advantage of by people that want to control you with fear. And, you know, this belief that, well, if I'm suffering, it's because I was bad before and it's all my thing to atone for, and there's no one else to blame for it. That's a belief that a capitalist / fascist could definitely leverage into their ideology, very obviously. In
And
the
that's
same way that, you know, Christianity and Islam and other major religions have these facets that can be sort of easily co-opted to these sorts of ends, even though, you know, you look into something like Islam and you're like, wow, this is a beautiful religion, you know, how did this happen?
It's same with like Christianity, because you know I'm Catholic. I know Chris is Christian, and you know my left beliefs come from like some of the teachings of Jesus, and previous socialists before Marx were Christians. It wasn't Marx kind of brought that whole religion is the opiate of the masses thing, which I thought was a huge error on his part.
well,
Because
so Marx and Bakunin. Marx thought religion was unscientific, and Bakunin thought God was this ultimate boss and landlord. And if you believed in God, then you were automatically sort of justifying the boss and the landlord.
But the reality is like 90% of the world believes in God.
Oh,
So,
sure.
Like, you know, you're alienating majority of the poorest workers by saying like their religion is wrong.
Exactly. And
Also,
let's
saying something is the opiate of the masses, well, that to me makes it sound like a fucking good thing. Okay, like how many of us are like 100% sober all the time to get through all this bullshit, right? Like Marx himself was definitely a big time drunk, smoking opium.
I will be
just
honest.
having a good time, partying a lot, and believe me, all the power to you. Rest in it. But you know, like I think that's something that people get a little confused sometimes about that phrase, even is like the opiate of the masses. Well, sure, if you're thinking of it from a hyper conservative anti-drugs viewpoint, then that's a strictly bad thing. But if you're thinking about it from the viewpoint of like, dang, we all need an opiate sometimes in our life, then
Marx
suddenly
meant
it doesn't sound so bad, right? Like if I could go to church,
what Marx
and feel
meant
better,
was very literal. What Marx meant was very literal. He meant that religion was used to dull the pain that would otherwise cause revolution. And that's very much something that Marx believed. And the reason he believed it, and there are other socialists who believe this too, Bakunin agreed with Marx on this, even though they disagreed on almost everything, is that the idea that suffering in this world will bring a reward in the next world makes it seem like you really don't have to do anything in this world, because as long as you're a good person, the next world is going to be better. So who really cares?
Yeah.
And that's kind of counter-revolutionary too, in a certain way.
I would say that, you know, he was obviously wrong, because look at the Middle East. Look how religious they are. They're willing to die for their religion in a way that American leftists and Western leftists aren't willing to die for their beliefs. So, I mean, he was wrong completely on like how you could utilize religion with socialism and communism. And
he was thinking, because this is something that people forget. Marx was a bougie European
Yeah.
who was talking about life in Europe from his rather bougie European perspective.
Marx was basically equivalent to those people on Reddit that like are just mad because their mom used to make them go to church and church fucking sucked and all the old white ladies there sucked.
No,
like,
the
that
guy
was
who Marx is, the guy who Marx is in the movies about the family business empire. There's always the son-in-law who married the rich guy's daughter, who isn't really accepted by the rest of the family. And that was Karl Marx. He married a rich guy's daughter, and he lived off his rich wife and wealthy father-in-law's money for most of his life.
And his rich buddy Engels.
And if you would ask Marx, well, do you mean all religion or just religion around here? He probably would have himself said, oh, just religion around here.
Well, no, he probably would have said all religion, but he was...
But either way, like, he was wrong. So... and you can see this in socialist movements.
Liberation theology
was undermined from the very beginning by the Russian Orthodox Church. They created a huge enemy from the get-go by trying to, limit or outright restrict, people's access to this church that meant everything to a lot of Russian families.
And the two big mistakes, and you can argue all you like about whether the theory was right or wrong, but these were the two big political mistakes that caused the Soviets trouble a couple of times during their early existence. Was the peasants were inclined towards communal farming already. They already Russian peasants already lived a socialist lifestyle. And that socialist lifestyle was one that the anarchists naturally appealed to because it was based in the community and the community owning its own resources locally and controlling those resources itself for its own benefit. Whereas the Marxist-Leninist vision of collectivism was a bunch of people, well, not necessarily right away, but eventually became under Stalin, a bunch of people thrown together in a collective farm. This is true. This cannot be denied. There are competitions between various people in my social circle about who is the hottest. and Kennedy Cooper is always very, very competitive in those discussions.
I'm flattered. Thank you. Yeah, and also we need to talk about, because it's relevant to this, what was something that held those Russian peasants that communally farmed together? Where was a place that they met?
That was the church,
weekly?
and that was the second part. And so they did. The Marxist-Leninists made two mistakes. The first was they broke up the natural peasant collective to create the artificial communist collective. They did that twice, once under Lenin and once under Stalin. And the first time under Lenin, they actually admitted, oh shit, we're making things worse instead of better. We better pay people to farm for us for at least a little while. And they ended up having to actually give peasants their land back and pay and buy the grain from them in order to be able to move their agricultural system in the direction they wanted to. They actually had to make that anarchist concession to peasant land ownership. But of course, Stalin came along later and tore it apart again and collectivized again and caused the same set of troubles all over again. And those troubles never completely went away again after Stalin. And that was because he deliberately pissed off the peasants with collectivization, and by really, and of course the peasants had already been pissed off by having their religion taken away. And even though Stalin in some ways tried to let them have their religion back here and there, it really wasn't the same.
No. You got to think of it like this, okay? So, like, I think I've mentioned this on this show once before, but the hierarchy of needs, which, by the way, as I understand it, should be correctly attributed to the Blackfoot tribe and was stolen by a guy named Maslow that people write about in textbooks. The hierarchy of needs, you look at it, and if you look at like a bunch of the needs in the middle, like above like the basic stuff like food and shelter, and below like full self-actualization, church could get you a lot of those things, especially a good church. And so if you take that out of a lot of people's communities, you have to immediately replace it with an incredibly strong communal structure to have any chance. But traditionally, historically, the communist movements that have been anti-religion have just simply stripped religion from the community and not really put much in to directly replace the same kinds of direct communal involvement. And even if you did, it would be okay for people to reject your substitute because they're allowed to want the traditions that they've always lived with.
It raises the question, is sports a religion? Because if sports is a religion, then the USSR really, really tried hard to replace church with sports.
I mean, it's not the Olympic level, but like NFL and NBA.
Well, they tried to do stuff. They tried to do all sorts of sports at really to a much higher degree than we ever did in the U.S.
Yeah, but I would say like we're way more into sports in the U.S. than Russia.
So now again, you've got to think about that. Russia now, probably. The USSR took sports seriously. And I'm not just talking about Olympic sports. The USSR had sports for practically everyone who wanted to play at every level, with the deliberate intention of finding all the best athletes and taking care of them because they were the best athletes and basically letting them play all the time.
Yeah. Here's what I would say about the question of is sports religion. Does it act like a religion in certain senses, like iconography and fervor and things like that? Yes, absolutely. But is it a religion in the way of that hierarchy of needs that I was talking about? Not really. In some cases, it can come close, but it's still not the same as church in the traditional old style. And this is very true of old Orthodox Russian churches that would have been the centerpiece of these communities, these poor farming communities. Church of this old style was a place where you had your birthday party. It was a place where people slept if they were traveling through town and they needed a place to stay. It was a true community center. And you knew that when you went there on Sunday, that all of your friends and neighbors would be there and that you could have meetings about things about town. And it was very common for old style churches to have town meetings directly after church service.
Yeah.
Because they knew this, hey, everybody's here basically. And if you're not here, well, at least you knew where to be. Like, it's not a mystery, and you have to think about, like, when we're talking about these rural peasant farming communities in the 1800s, leading up to the time of the socialist revolution, they were, you're living in a town where the church may be your only big building.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, literally, people bring the town's delivery of goods that you ship in to the church. and drop them off there, and then you come get your goods that were delivered, because that's the place. That's it. So you can't just take that from people and not replace it with extraordinarily significant things and expect any kind of result. And so, yeah, no, sports isn't going to cut it, because you're not going to gather people in that same way, offer them those same kinds of opportunities.
They also do get basic economic human rights.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would like to share an anecdote. So, like, recently we had a religious holiday called White Sunday, which is a mix of, Catholicism, Christianity, and Samoan culture that celebrates kids. All the kids, they get brand new white outfits, and they go and perform dances, speeches, and songs. And, me and my wife and kids, we went into her family's village, and at her family's home, the church is like right across from her house. So we walk over to the church. We watch the kids do the pageantry thing. It lasted about like 7 hours, and you're also able to go in and out during it. And I'm outside having a cigarette with her brother and his cousins and some of her uncles, and some of them are drinking vodka out of water bottles during the church ceremony, and some of them are smoking weed, and it's a chance to like bond with like other people in the village that you haven't seen in like weeks and stuff. And it was a really, to me, it was a chill event. And at the same time, like when we were like through with it, we were able, since it's so close to the house, we walked back to the house and duck out early. Like I think we were there for like 5 hours, and from like 2:30 to like about 6. And they kept going on until like about 9 o'clock at night. But it was a nice thing, even though I don't go to church at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm Catholic, but I just don't. This is not my thing, going to church. But I go to church for like the special events. I'll be there for Christmas. I'll be there for.
And in most old style town churches, you didn't have to go all the time or go at all really to use the services of the church. That wasn't required in most towns. There were some towns that were particularly fervorous, and you'll hear stories about the horrible churches in some places, but that wasn't the norm. In these older style churches, if you needed to use the church services, you were allowed to regardless. Because again, it was the only thing in town, so they're not going to deny you. And it's funny how, you're kind of like talking about in like almost like hushed terms, drinking vodka out of water bottles. When I mentioned the having your birthday party in the church in the old days, you get drunk at the church in those situations. You push the pews aside, you get out tables and chairs, everybody would get drunk, and then everybody would clean it up the next day or a day or two later, because again, it's the town's one community space, and everybody just helped take care of it.
Drinking was something people did after church in Germany in quite a lot of Catholic and Lutheran communities.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much Calvinists, because, Calvinists don't like fun.
The tradition of potluck used to include beer pretty commonly.
I think it's interesting, like, Samoa is a very conservative place in some ways. Like, marijuana is very common here. Because it grows naturally. It's illegal, but at the same time, like, politicians smoke it, cops smoke it, customs people smoke it. And I would say at least 40% of the population smokes marijuana, if not more. But we don't have abortion here. You need a prescription to get the morning after pill. But the same, and our ministry of women was ran by a man. But at the same time, like, we are very, like, they let people drink. Then, like, at the church, like, they know that people are going to be drinking outside the church, and coming back in and out, and like no one cares. They know that people are going to be smoking weed around the church and go in back inside, and no one really it's not like this thing that's judged. And in those ways, and then there's a lot of people that aren't married, despite the fact this is a super religious country, and they're having domestic partnerships with kids, and they're not getting married. So like
that's common everywhere.
Yeah. So in a weird way, it's like, yeah, they're really religious here, but not in the same way as like evangelicals in America. It's like, it's not like that crazy.
Well, let's remember that white evangelicals in America and the various churches that their missionaries have started around the world are sort of their own creature.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know of many Catholics anymore who still hunt witches. But Pentecostals in Kenya and Papua New Guinea still hunt witches. And that's not because they're bad people there. That's because our Christians taught that to them.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about how bad people can twist certain parts of religion and human sacrifice type practices, which is what I consider witchcraft, accusing people of witchcraft and killing them for it, is the kind of thing that is easier to sell to someone who is relatively desperate, because you're offering them a possible solution to their desperation. It is the moral wickedness of people in your community that must be rooted out, and then all of these problems will go away.
The
Isn't
witch
that
was
a convenient thing to believe?
The witch was usually actively causing those problems. It was the witch who made your cow stop giving milk. It was the witch who made your donkey die.
Why did all of our crops fail this year? The witch. She's cursing us. And then, what do? You find someone, usually a woman or someone else who's traditionally disempowered in your community, and you find someone who is like that but has become empowered in spite of that, and you take it away from them. And that's your witch.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I got to cut out though, but thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's been a plenty long show. Thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug or promote before you get out of here?
No. Maybe next time.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us.
I know what you're talking about, and I hope so.
All right. All right. See you guys later. Bye.
See you later.
All right.
I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Dave Chappelle before we finished.
I just want to mention this. This can be our kind of closing thing.
I have one more thing after this. I do think I will be fair.
But we'll try to keep this stuff brief because it's already been a long show. But I just want to mention this quickly. So Dave Chappelle said some relatively terrible things in his most recent special. He said some fairly terrible things in all of his Netflix comedy specials so far, in terms of queer-phobic type comments. And some people are upset about it and staged a walkout at Netflix because there are a lot of queer folks that work at Netflix, and a lot of people who work at Netflix who believe in allyship and who believe in workers' power and things like that, who all decided to band together and have a walkout.
Yep.
So Dave Chappelle is calling this walkout, quote unquote, and this is his words, corporate censorship.
The employees are not the corporation, if I understand how these things work under American law.
The CEO has publicly supported him.
I thought I had seen that somewhere.
His special is still available online, streaming right now on Netflix. I sound like an advertisement. the workers walked out. He's calling it corporate censorship. This is the level of twistedness that we have in this country with some
That's a good
stuff.
question.
I don't know if they've all been fired yet. I know that one person in particular who was organizing has for sure been fired. I need to look into like what the follow-up has been. It wouldn't surprise me if they all get fired, to be honest. But
That sounds like something Netflix would do. I agree.
yeah,
I don't know either.
And it's worth noting that this shit has real consequences. Alec Baldwin killing somebody was the consequence of union employees walking out of a set and then Alec Baldwin quickly hiring scabs.
Well, let's be fair. Let's be fair, because this is important and I don't want to lose too much of it. It wasn't just that union people walked out and they hired scabs. The armorer was apparently never a union guy in the first place. It was a 24-year-old kid, as such things go. Not to make fun of some of my very accomplished and intelligent 24-year-old followers, but this guy was given a job he was not experienced or qualified for. And sometimes that's a bad start. There's also the fact that everything is made so much worse by the profit motive anyway. You don't want to back down and lose face.
Yeah. So, this is a situation where we should really talk about who's worth defending, what's worth defending. I just want to say for the record, and I said something about this that was very similar on Twitter, but if someone said to you that they were ashamed to have quote unquote accidentally called a trans woman beautiful, to have been quote unquote tricked into it, and that for them that was like an oppressive experience for them, if they were a random person, any reasonable person would say, whoa, that's messed up, that's not good. Because we're all learning to be better than that slowly as a society. We're fighting for it tooth and nail. It's not always happening at the speed that we'd like, but slowly as a society, we're all learning that it's not okay to do something like that. It's not okay to treat someone like that. But because a famous person who is well liked by a lot of people said it, people who ordinarily would not defend someone like this are attempting to defend him. And even some people that I like.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
And I'm not going to name any names because I'm not trying to fucking start shit. These people are good people, and at the end of the day, we're having a disagreement that we can get over. But what I will say is that, think about it like that. If Dave Chappelle was a guy with 300 followers on Twitter just starting shit, would you defend him for saying the things that he said? If Dave Chappelle was just an asshole, that barely had even if he had 10,000 followers, would you defend him?
So let's go really simple. If, say, Jackson Hinkle, just to pull a name out of thin air, if, say, Jackson Hinkle said something like, "Oh, I can't support this bourgeois Netflix walkout. I have to support the real working class people protesting vaccine mandates," wouldn't we look at him funny?
Wouldn't we?
I know I would.
So that's all I wanted to add to that story. I think that in time, everybody who initially tried to defend him will probably realize better as this story keeps getting worse, because at this point it's just going to keep getting worse, unfortunately. Both Dave Chappelle and the company that is currently writing his checks have decided to keep doubling down on this issue. They seem to be interested in giving absolutely no ground. This is the Joe Biden presidency where we're supposed to be able to organize easier. Folks, this is how it's going so far. And so that's a little update on that news that is unfortunately close to my heart and not good. Chris, what's your final item for the night?
My final thought is fairly simple. And I believe that it really is the proof that we need to take the cops' guns away, take their money away, and eventually abolish them and get rid of them. Last Thursday, in Chicago, a cop got into a wrestling match of some kind with a member of the civilian population, and his gun got pulled, and he shot somebody. In this case, the two other cops, not the member of the civilian population he was scuffling with, but two other cops. Now, the police are calling this an accidental shooting. One could speculate that a cop got his ass kicked and had his gun taken away. There are other things that people could guess in between those two extremes. But what happened is a cop pulled a trigger, or someone pulled a trigger, and two cops got shot. It's not enough. It's not enough that the cops can't be trusted not to shoot the general population. They also can't be trusted not to shoot each other by mistake, or in some cases on purpose. And why are we putting up with them? That's my final thought, and that's my final question.
It's a good final question.
On that note, I want to wish everybody a great night. Again,
and a great week. You know, we don't see you again until
true.
Next Monday at the same time.
We do hope you have a great week. Obviously, you can follow us on Twitter. There are our handles. I am on Patreon, Eclectic Radical. Eclectic Radical is the YouTube channel. Please subscribe, follow, join the Patreon. I will keep bullying Kennedy. They will find some way for you to pay them too. I promise. And on that note, everybody have a great night. We will tweet at you.
Bye, y'all.